Hello and welcome back to Kimboshi Sumo, an outlet where we cover the time-honored art of two large men striking one another in an extremely particular and particularly entertaining fashion. But this week, we're covering something a little different than our beloved sport of Ozumo itself. This week, we're going to discuss our system for Fantasy Sumo League, or Fantasy Sumo Association, I suppose I should call it if we're going to mirror the real thing. And we're going to talk about how we think you could use it to help grow the fandom of sumo in your area or just in your friend group. Anyone who's stumbled onto this channel on their own already understands just how exciting and engaging the sport of sumo is to follow, but outside of Japan, it certainly doesn't have the same kind of following, meaning if you find your way to the promised land of Ozumo fandom, you're often standing there alone. I know that was the case for me. The goal of putting this game system out there is to give your friends an entryway into the sport, which once they're in, we hope they'll be hooked just as quickly as we all are. And so, if you're watching this video because a friend sent it to you, welcome! We're glad you're here. We hope you give this fantasy league a shot with whatever friend shared this with you and discover just how exciting sumo is the same way we all did, by watching it. The basic building block of fantasy sumo is the Heya, or stable. In real sumo, this refers to the building where a group of Rikishi wrestlers, all under the same coaching regime, live, eat, and train together, as well as the group of wrestlers themselves if we're talking about the stable. So to some extent, the same is true in fantasy sumo. The Heya, or stable, whichever term you prefer to use in your particular league, refers to the group of wrestlers each player has drafted or selected onto their team before the basho, which is the tournament itself. The players themselves are referred to as oyakata, or stable masters, the same thing as referring to them as coaches or managers in a different fantasy sport, and just like the real retired high-performing Rikishi who coach up the next generation of wrestlers in Ozumo. So, if we know each of our fantasy stable masters needs a stable of wrestlers, how do they get them? Again, borrowing from established fantasy sports, this is accomplished through a draft. In fantasy sumo, just like other fantasy sports, drafting Rikishi just means picking them off of the Bansuke rankings for the upcoming tournament to join your stable for that basho. In the case of fantasy sumo, these drafts can either be what we will call inclusive or exclusive. We'll talk about exclusive drafts first because it's the system used by most other fantasy sports, so if you're coming here with experience in a different kind of fantasy sport, this might be familiar to you. Exclusive drafting simply means that once one stable master, or player, has picked a Rikishi, no other stable master can have them for that basho. They're already in a Heya. In traditional fantasy sports, these kinds of drafts are generally done in one of two ways. First, a standard draft with players taking turns, 1 through however many players you have, we'll say 7 for an example, and returning to player 1 once all 7 players have made a pick. Or, second, a snake draft where the 7th player gets to pick twice in a row and the rounds proceed in reverse fashion after that to make up for the disadvantage of picking last. If you have a group of friends who really thrive on competition without getting frustrated or angry with one another, this system could benefit you in your fantasy league as it ensures that more Rikishi are selected, meaning that there are more meaningful matches for you and your friends on each day of the tournament. It also helps your friends establish more meaningful connections to wrestlers when they are the only one allowed to have that Rikishi in their stable. Those become their guys, who they get to, or have to, ride or die with for the duration of the basho. However, the downside is that once your stable masters know a little bit more about sumo, about who they like and want to root for, and who they want to root against in a tournament, this system can cause them to miss out on their favorites, which can be a major feel-bad moment. To wait 6 weeks for a tournament to start, and only then find out that you don't get to root for your favorite Rikishi because your friend picked them number 3 and you had the number 4 pick, that stinks. And on top of that, competition is not always the most enjoyable experience for people and not the best way to get them to sincerely like following a sport in its own right. It's stressful and causes anxiety for lots of people who don't traditionally follow sports or play in fantasy leagues, or even for those who do. For these feel-bad reasons, I personally tend to use an inclusive drafting system for my fantasy league instead. In the inclusive system, oyakata still draft players off of the Bansuke, but in this system, Rikishi can belong to multiple Heya, meaning if you and your friends all end up with particular wrestlers who you all love to root for, in my friend group this tends to be the little ball of power that is Ishiura and the delightfully rotund Chiyomaru, you can all put them in your stable. Everyone can have them. If the goal is to get your friends into sumo and to have a good time watching it together, I would highly recommend the inclusive system. Everyone gets to pick their favorite wrestler. The group can pick party wrestlers or hometown favorites in the tournament to tournament. And it can be more laid back than heavily competitive, if that's what's healthiest for your friend group. If you do choose to go this route, there's no need for standard or snake drafts, and you can all either choose a time to get together digitally or in person to hash out your picks and stables, or if time is at a premium with your friend group, or if you all live at a distance from each other, you can make your picks separately and send them to the chairperson of your Fantasy Sumo Association. Regardless, if you do go with the inclusive route, which again, I personally recommend if your goal is to get your friends into the sport more than compete with them, I would still recommend encouraging your stable masters to pick as broad a diversity of Rikishi as possible to make sure there are as many meaningful matches per day as possible. From personal experience, engagement for new viewers drops to almost zero if the two wrestlers in a match are not in their stable or in any of their friends' stables. They simply have no rooting interest, so that's the motivating factor there. But if the goal is to keep engagement high throughout the boss show and to have as diverse of stables as possible, then our goal should generally be to have between 4 and 7 Oyakata stable masters with 6 Rikishi per stable. With 4 stable masters and 6 Rikishi per stable, we should hopefully have more than half of the field represented in our picks, ensuring that we have a good chance of most matches having at least some sort of rooting interest for our Fantasy Sumo Association. By the same token, 7 stables at 6 Rikishi each. If no one duplicated picks, that puts us at 42 out of 42 top division Makuuchi Rikishi, so perfect, I guess. Now, these numbers won't always be perfect in an inclusive system because some players might double up, but some also might choose to have less than 6 wrestlers in their stable, which is perfectly legal in this format. First, the 6 Rikishi cap is to set some sort of standardization and to prevent anyone from just flooding the field with picks to win by default without actually crafting a cohesive stable. Any more than that, and you also run the risk of having one stable master's Rikishi just fighting each other day after day, which really isn't the goal. Taking less than 6, however, is an acceptable strategy because of the unique scoring system in this Fantasy Sumo rule set, specifically or namely, bidding. But before we can cover bidding, let's talk about how these Rikishi score points in the first place. The core scoring component in this system is, unsurprisingly, based on individual match wins. For each win, a Rikishi earns 25 points. However, not all wins are equal, because in sumo not all wins are equal. First off, as veteran sumo fans know, a Rikishi's 8th win in a basho secures their Kachikoshi, more wins than losses, winning record. Because of this, a Rikishi's 8th win in Fantasy Sumo earns them 50 bonus points to drive home the fact for new viewers that this is the first goal for all Rikishis at the start of a basho, get that 8th win. Upset victories over Sanyaku opponents are a big deal in sumo, and one of the main goals of this Fantasy Sumo Association, again, is to teach newcomers some of the basics of sumo through the game's mechanics. So, in order to hammer home that important point, wins over titled Sanyaku opponents need to be worth more. They need to be weighted heavier than regular Maegashira wins. However, veteran sumo fans also know that not every Sanyaku holds the same weight per se. So for this reason, a win against a Komusubi, the lowest ranked of the Sanyaku, earns a rank and filer Maegashira mana bonus 25 points, so that win's worth a total of 50. A win against a Sekiwake earns 50 bonus points for a total of 75, and a win against an Ozeki earns a whopping 100 bonus points for a total of 125 points. Some of these point totals may need to be adjusted in the future, but in general, when in doubt, we tried to follow the guiding principle that more points is more fun because it feels like more progress for players. Anything we can do to try to drive up engagement always seems like the right answer when the primary goal is to turn non-sumo fans into sumo fans. Just like it's exciting to watch a Maegashira upset an Ozeki for veteran sumo fans, we want that extra incentive to be there for newcomers as well to understand the gravity of that kind of upset. And of course, Yokozuna aren't left out. For a Maegashira rank and filer, earning a Kinboshi Gold Star and upset victory over a Yokozuna can be one of the most important victories of their career, certainly of the basho, so the same needs to be true in Fantasy Sumo. With this in mind, we made a Kinboshi worth 250 bonus points, plus the 25 for the win, meaning 275 total. However, just like in real Ozumo, these bonuses can only be earned by Maegashira rank and filers to give stable masters an incentive to spread their picks across the Bansuke rankings instead of just having everyone grab the highest ranked Rikishi every tournament. After that, there are also 3 special prizes, each worth 300 points to the Rikishi who secures one. These prizes show longevity over the course of a tournament, so they need to be worth more than a single win, even if it came against a Yokozuna. But the granddaddy of all prizes is of course the Yusho, the championship, which will earn a Rikishi 500 bonus points, the highest possible accumulation of points for a single event. However, if you've seen a fair share of sumo recently, you may ask yourself, why wouldn't everyone simply take the Yokozuna every time then? Because more often than not, they're the favorite for the Yusho and come through with it. The answer to that is the aforementioned bidding. In Fantasy Sumo, every stable master is essentially making a bid on their Rikishi when they draft them, where they are guaranteeing they believe a wrestler will earn more than a set value of points. That point value is set by the Fantasy Sumo Association chairperson, and can be anything they see as fair, but the way I do it and the way I recommend you at least start out is this. Take the Rikishi's performance in their last 3 basho and average out their wins, rounded up. Then, take that win total and multiply it by 25, because they'll get 25 points for each win. If the wrestler's average includes a kachikoshi, go ahead and add that 50 to their bid, because that means on average they're expected to get that kachikoshi. So any wrestler doing the average of what we expect from them, that doesn't deserve points. We need them to outshine their average. If one or more of the wrestler's previous tournaments was in Juryo, divide the number of Juryo wins by 2 before adding that to their overall total and before multiplying by 25, because second division holds less weight and lighter competition than Makuuchi, so those wins matter less. For each successively lower division, go ahead and use a 4th, an 8th, etc. as you go down. Each division underneath is worth half as much as the division above it. At this time, I don't add in points for special prizes because they're just naturally more volatile and harder to pick, so by the more points, more fun metrics stated previously, adding too many points to each Rikishi's bid makes it less likely that stable masters can pay off their bids, which means less fun, basically. Yusho, however, have to factor in. For them, I use the same kind of metric with the last 3 basho for starters. I take however many Yusho the wrestler won over the last 3 basho, add those points together, and divide by 3, and then add that to their bid total. Okay, now I know that was clear as mud, so let's do a quick example together to see if that helps clarify things to actually watch the math worked on screen. We'll grab the Yokozuna Terunofuji as our example. As you can see, over his last 3 tournaments, Terunofuji only competed in Makuuchi, so we don't need to divide any of his wins by 2. In September 2021, he went 13-2, and he won the Yusho. In November, he went 15-0 and won the Yusho. And in January of this year, he went 11-4 and did not win the championship. So first, we'll figure out his average wins over the last 3 basho. That's 13 plus 15 plus 11 makes 39. Divided by 3 gives us 13, so our system will predict that Terunofuji should have 13 wins in March at a minimum. If we multiply 13 by 25, we get a proposed starting bid of 325 points. However, we can see that his average win total also included a kachikoshi. He has a total higher than 8 wins. So we can go ahead and add that extra 50 to his point total right now and say that that first bid is 375 to start with. This is where the math will end for most Rikishi, but for the Yokozuna Terunofuji, he also won 2 out of 3 Yusho in that time, so we have a little extra work to do here. With each Yusho being worth 500, we can add those 2 titles together and get a total of 1,000 points, but he didn't win the 3rd Yusho in January, so we only divide that 1,000 in this case by 3, and get a total slightly less than the 500 one might have expected from a basho favorite and Yokozuna, meaning he might be an enticing pick for lots of Oyakata in March. 1,000 doesn't divide evenly by 3 though, and we end up getting 333 1/3. In this case, we simply always round up to the nearest increment of 25, so that means his Yusho bid should be 350. We can add 375 to 350 and get a total bid of 725 points for his March Harubasho bid. That is certainly a hefty sum, which will hopefully make at least some Oyakata think twice about pinning their entire strategy on the favorite Terunofuji, who will start the basho with negative 725 points and will need to earn at least that many points to break even. That's the real deal of how the bid works. Before a Rikishi can actually start earning points for his Oyakata, for his Heya, he actually has to pay off his bid in wins or points in one way or another. This system is an attempt to equalize Rikishi to some extent and encourage Oyakata to pick diverse rosters for their stables, you know? Get a few dark horse candidates who have really low bids, but also maybe they only get 5 wins in the Basho, but maybe they get 8 in the Kachikoshi and get a bunch of bonus points for you. Now, I know that is still a lot to ask of budding Fantasy Sumo Association chairpersons, so don't worry. If you check back on this channel before each Basho, we're going to do a tournament preview show where we give some analysis of Rikishi in general, make our picks for who we think will thrive in the Basho, just in general again, but also we're going to make some fantasy perspective picks as well, and we'll include all this information on the bid totals for the entire Makuuchi field to kick off the tournament. So, check back here each Basho and before each Fantasy Sumo Basho you're going to play if you want the math to be done for you instead of having to worry about fudging with it yourself. But other than that, that's it. I've used this system with my friends and it was thankfully a hit for us. It got several of them into sumo just in general, and even some others who may not be following sumo Twitter accounts or feverishly refreshing the Grand Sumo website are still excited to play another Basho of Fantasy Sumo, so that's great. I consider that a win. If you think you and your friends would enjoy this system yourself, please share it with them. Send this video along and shoot us a comment back letting us know if you used it, how your league season went, and what the Basho looked like from your all's perspective. The system is a work in progress and we'll be making rule adjustments and update videos periodically if we find something that seems particularly broken, but we'd love to hear how your league plays out and what your experiences are with the system as well. So if you do try it out, let us know that you did and what your results were in the comments below. We're looking forward to hearing back. So other than that, without further ado, thanks for watching everybody and we'll talk to you again soon.